The wind had teeth that morning. It came down from the high ridges and across the open plain like it wanted to flay the world clean, whistling through the brittle remnants of last summer's grass and shaking loose the dry husks of cottonwoods that rimmed the creek. Frost clung to the fence rails, silvering the worn wood, and the earth was hard beneath Jacob Ellery's boots, hard and cold and unforgiving, like it had made up its mind not to yield to anything anymore. He stood in the yard beside the barn, one gloved hand resting on the saddle horn slung over his hip, the other wrapped around a tin cup, gone lukewarm with yesterday's coffee. He hadn't slept, not really, just sat by the fire until the coals turned to ash, letting the silence fold in around him. The house was too quiet now, always had been, truth told. But last night, the silence felt louder than usual, like someone had taken something that had no name and left a hole in its place. The mare had been pawing at her stall wall all morning, skittish and unquiet. She wasn't the sort to spook over nothing, and Jacob figured maybe a coyote had wandered too close again. But when he stepped into the barn, the shadows felt different. Dense, holding their breath. He didn't speak, just walked slow, measured boots, echoing soft on the packed earth. The hayloft ladder creaked. He stopped. Something shifted in the loft, barely more than a whisper of sound, but it wasn't the wind. It was too careful for that. He moved toward it, quiet as a man like him could be, and set the cup down on a barrel. The ladder was worn smooth with years of use, the rungs familiar beneath his gloves. He climbed halfway, then paused. A foot, a small one, jerked back from the edge of the loft. Jacob exhaled once long and steady. Then he spoke low and flat. "You don't got to run." No answer. "I ain't gonna hurt you." A long pause. Then slowly a face came into view. A child. Couldn't have been more than 8, maybe 9. Clothes too thin for the cold. Hair a wild tangle. Eyes wide as the prairie sky, but not soft. Eyes that had seen more than they should have. Jacob didn't move. The child looked at him like a cornered fox. He could see the fight in them and the fear beneath it. He raised one hand, palm open. "You hungry?" Still no answer. But the child didn't bolt. That was something. Jacob waited a moment longer, then eased back down the ladder. He didn't look up again, didn't ask questions, didn't force it. He just left the barn door cracked and made his way to the house. It was near on 20 minutes before the child appeared barefoot on the porch, hugging their arms tight around themselves. Jacob was by the stove pan, hot with cornmeal and lard. The child didn't step inside, just stood there trembling, trying not to. He turned and looked, really looked. And then he asked gentle, "What's your name?" The child's mouth moved. A whisper, almost inaudible, but he heard it. And when he did, the sound of it went through him like a knife. Because the name, she said, soft and uncertain, was one he knew. Claire. His knees nearly buckled. His hand found the edge of the counter without thinking. The world tilted just for a second, because Claire was the name of his sister's girl, the one who'd disappeared 3 winters back, the one they'd buried an empty box for. He stared at her heart, pounding like hoofbeats in his chest, and saw it now, the shape of her face, the cut of her chin. And God help him, she had Annie's eyes. Big and dark and breakable. She was trembling. He realized he hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. So he swallowed hard and stepped back, hands raised like he was the one intruding. "Come in," he said. "It's warm." She stepped over the threshold like it hurt to hope. She didn't eat at first. Just sat there at the edge of the kitchen chair, knees drawn up under Jacob's old quilt, staring at the plate like she didn't believe it was real. Or maybe she did, but couldn't trust it to stay. Jacob kept his hands busy scraping pans, wiping down the counter, pretending like everything wasn't coming apart inside him. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. Her being there at all was like seeing a ghost step out of the snow. If he pressed too hard, she might vanish for good. Finally, after the eggs had gone cold and the bread had started to stiffen, she picked up the fork. Ate quiet and fast, like she'd learned to finish before someone took it away. Jacob turned his back and stared out the window, giving her space. The frost had melted off the fence. A pair of magpies hopped across the snow, arguing. He watched them bicker and thought of his sister, how Annie used to braid Clara's hair by the fire humming, that same hymn their mother used to hum, the one about the river and the Lord's good hand. She'd stopped humming it after the girl went missing. He turned around after a while, leaned on the edge of the sink. How long you been out there? Clara didn't answer. Her eyes dropped to the tabletop. Jacob nodded like that was answer enough. You been alone. A beat. Then the faintest shake of her head. He felt the weight of that answer settle in his chest. There were only a handful of reasons a child vanished and didn't come home. None of them sat right with him. She looked up at him then. Really looked. And her voice, when it came, was small but clear. He said my name wasn't mine anymore. Jacob's gut clenched. She blinked slow, like she was seeing two worlds at once, the warm one in this kitchen and the cold one she'd come from. He said I was nobody. Jacob didn't move, didn't speak. If he did, the fury might rise too fast to hold. Instead, he crossed to the stove and poured her a cup of warm milk, set it in front of her without a word. She wrapped her hands around it like it was life itself. I got out, she said, staring into the steam. I ran when he slept. He crouched in front of her, slow and level. Did he hurt you? She didn't flinch, just nodded, one sharp dip. That was when he let himself feel it. Not the grief, not the anger, but the thing underneath, a rising tide of purpose, of steady resolve. He didn't know who the man was yet, but he would find out. And he'd bury the bastard if need be. Clara looked at him like she knew exactly what he was thinking. Jacob stood and walked into the back room. Came out with a bundle of folded clothes, his sister's old things from years past, still packed away, too full of memory to throw out. He set them on the table and backed away. You change when you're ready, he said. Ain't no one gonna take your name here. She didn't answer, but her shoulders sank just a little, like something deep inside had unclenched. He stepped onto the porch, leaving the door ajar, and stood there a long while, staring at the plains. The sky had opened wide, winter blue and hard as bone. Nothing moved but the wind and his breath. Inside, he heard the soft rustle of fabric, the creak of the chair. Then the faint sound of water in the basin. He looked down at his hands, calloused, cracked, too rough for a child's skin, and wondered how he was going to do this. He was not a man made for care. He was built for work and solitude and the steady ache of things lost too long ago. But now Clara was here. Flesh and blood, and nothing else mattered. She was alive, and that meant he had work to do. If the dust on this trail settled in your bones, stay and ride on with us. By the end of the second day, she still hadn't said much more. Just yes or no, a nod, a shrug. But she followed Jacob outside that morning, wrapped in her aunt's wool coat, with sleeves too long for her arms boots stuffed with wool rags to make them fit. She stood in the snow shadow of the barn while he split wood, watched him like a hawk, quiet, still eyes always moving. When he offered her a smaller axe, she didn't take it. Just looked at it like it was a test, and maybe it was. Jacob didn't push. He just set it down beside the block and kept working. By midday, she'd split 5 logs. Not cleanly, not fast, but she did it without complaint. Jacob said nothing, but when he handed her a cup of hot broth on the porch, he nodded once. That was all. She sipped it slow, and he thought she might been trying not to smile. They settled into a rhythm after that. She didn't hover, didn't beg for attention. but she was always near dragging water from the pump feeding the hens setting kindling by the stove. Not out of obedience, out of need. Jacob found himself noticing things he hadn't in a long time, like how loud the wind was at night, or how the chimney smoked funny when the weather changed. He thought about things he hadn't said in years, like how his father used to oil the tack every Sunday, or how Annie laughed with her whole chest like she didn't know how to do anything halfway. One night, Clara stood by the hearth, tracing the edge of a horseshoe hung on the wall. That was hers, Jacob said. Clara didn't turn, but he saw her pause. My mom. He nodded. She was real fast, she said. In the stories. Jacob blinked, slow. Yeah. Fast and mean when she wanted to be. But she was soft with you. I don't remember. Jacob watched her hand rest flat against the wall. He stepped closer. She used to sing when she brushed your hair. Called you little feather. Said you were too light to stay on the ground. Clara's throat moved like she swallowed a stone. He said she gave me away. Jacob crouched beside her. She died trying to find you. The girl flinched, then stood stiff and still. Jacob didn't speak again, just waited slow and steady. Finally she whispered, he said no one wanted me. Jacob said he lied. Her lip trembled, but she bit it hard like she didn't trust it not to betray her. Jacob stood and laid a hand gently on her shoulder, rough palm, warm against the quilted coat. You're home now. And if you want to stay, this place is yours. Clara didn't say anything. But that night when he walked past her room on the way to stoke the fire, he saw the door cracked open. She was curled on the cot beneath the old quilt, fast asleep. In her hand, clutched tight, like a lifeline, was one of Annie's faded ribbons. Jacob turned and walked back down the hall. The floor creaked beneath him, familiar and worn. He stood at the window and looked out across the yard. The moon lit the snow in silver, and the barn stood watch over it all. For the first time in years, he felt something ease in his chest. He was not a man built for softness, but maybe, just maybe, there was room in him yet. The storm came, sudden low clouds dragging their bellies across the plains, turning the sky to iron, and the wind sharp enough to draw blood. Snow fell in tight, angry flurries, whiting out the fence line and burying the last of the feed buckets before midday. Jacob moved like a man half his age that morning, hauling firewood, boarding up the co-op, laying canvas over the hay to keep it dry. Clara was beside him the whole time, her scarf tied tight over her mouth, eyes watering from the cold. She didn't complain, didn't slow down. He caught her fingers shaking when she reached for the pump handle, and without a word he took the bucket from her. She let him just that once. They ate by the fire that night, stew hot and thick, and when Jacob noticed her staring at the flames, blinking too long between breaths, he asked, you remembering something? Clara nodded slow. What is it? Her voice was thin. I had a brother. I think. Jacob's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Real little. He cried a lot. I think his name was James. He set the spoon down. You never told us Annie had a boy too. She didn't. Clara looked up at him then, and the look in her eyes made something turn sideways in his chest. He wasn't mine either. He was already there. Jacob's stomach went cold. There with the man. She nodded once, lips pressed tight. Jacob pushed the bowl aside and leaned forward, hands braced on his knees. Clara, you don't have to say anything you ain't ready to, but I need to ask. Is that boy still out there? Her voice cracked. I don't know. Jacob stood paced once to the stove, then back. The weight in the room had changed, heavier now, darker, the way a sky feels before it breaks. I'll find out, he said. Clara looked up at him, eyes rimmed red but dry. He won't let him go easy. Jacob's jaw tightened. I don't care how hard he holds on. No boy deserves that. He stoked the fire too hard that night, filling the stove until the pipe ticked and groaned. Clara didn't speak again. She lay curled on the cot back to the wall, eyes open but unfocused. And Jacob sat by the window watching the snow fall, mind chewing on everything she hadn't said. The next morning, before the sun even touched the tops of the hills, he saddled the roan gelding. Clara stood at the gate, arms crossed over her chest, breath clouding the air. "You don't even know where," she said. "I know enough. What if he sees you first?" Jacob gave her a long look. "Then he's gonna wish he hadn't." She didn't smile, just said, "Be careful." Jacob touched the brim of his hat and rode out into the wind. The tracks were faint, barely there, but he knew where to look. Knew the abandoned line shack near the south ridge, the one with the crumbling chimney and the cellar door half buried in snow. He'd passed it before, never given it much thought. Now he gave it all his attention. By dusk he saw the smoke. It curled from a bent stovepipe, weak and wavering. He dismounted 2 ridges back, tied the gelding in a thicket of scrub, and crept forward with his rifle slung low. He saw the man first, gaunt, wild-eyed, pacing just inside the door. Then he heard it, a sound that cut deeper than any blade. A child coughing. Jacob's hands clenched around the rifle stock. He didn't rush, didn't let anger blind him. He waited for the wind to rise, and when it did, he stepped forward slow and sure. The door gave easy under his boot, wasn't even barred. Inside the place stank of mold, kerosene, and old meat. A single lamp sputtered on a crooked table, casting long bent shadows along the walls. The man turned at the sound, startled eyes, bloodshot hair hanging in greasy ropes. "Who the hell?" Jacob didn't answer. He stepped through the threshold and shut the door behind him, slow, deliberate, the rifle still slung, but his hands loose and ready. The man moved back a step, then another, until his spine found the far wall. Jacob's voice came low and calm. "Where's the boy?" The man's lip curled. "What boy ain't no?" Jacob took a step forward. "Don't lie." The silence hung sharp between them, the kind that split things open. Finally, from the corner, a sound, a thin whimper. A child curled on a cot made of burlap and old feed sacks. Couldn't have been more than 4, maybe 5. Pale, eyes too big for his face. When he saw Jacob, he tried to sit up, but swayed like a reed. The man stepped sideways just enough to put himself between them. Jacob's hand shifted near the rifle strap. "Move." "I ain't done nothing wrong." The man spat, voice too quick. "He's mine by right. No one cared for him. No one even asked. You took him." "I saved him." His voice cracked wide open, a mix of rage and desperation. "They left him like trash. He needed someone. Needed me." "You hurt him," Jacob said. The man's eyes went wild. "You don't get to decide what's hurt and what's saved." Jacob moved, then fast. Had the butt of the rifle against the man's chest before he could flinch. Drove him hard into the wall. The lamp jumped on the table, light flaring, then flickering low. "You don't touch that boy again," Jacob said. "You don't come near another child. Ever." The man slid to the floor, coughing, one arm clutched to his ribs. Jacob crossed the room and lifted the child, gently cradling the thin body like something carved from paper. The boy didn't fight, just buried his face in Jacob's coat, hands gripping tight. Outside, the wind cut across the hill like a warning. Jacob didn't look back. He left the door swinging open and rode hard into the dusk, the boy wrapped in his coat, held close against the cold. The storm had eased, but the land was still cruel, frostbitten and wide, the kind that asked what you were made of. By the time he reached the homestead, Clara was already outside, lantern-raised eyes scanning the dark. She saw them and ran. Jacob swung down and handed her the boy without a word. Her arms wrapped around him like they'd never let go again. The boy looked up at her, confused, weak. "James," she whispered. He blinked at her, and then, slow, like the name opened something in him, he nodded. Inside, Jacob stoked the fire high. Clara sat on the floor beside the hearth James, in her lap, her arms wound tight around him. She was crying now, silent and hard, and he didn't stop her. He just stood there watching the flames, the warmth pushing back the cold. The wind howled beyond the walls, but inside something held firm. A shelter, carved from loss and stubborn hope. Clara looked up at him through tears. "You found him?" Jacob nodded. "He's yours now." "No," she said, voice rough. "He's ours." And for once, Jacob didn't feel like a man who'd been left behind. He felt like one who'd come home. Spring arrived without asking. It bled into the edges of the land, slow and careful, the way trust does after a long winter. Snow melted in rutted trails first, then crept down the slopes into the hollows, feeding the creek until it ran fat and muddy. Grass pushed up shy green shoots and the cottonwoods began to twitch with leaf. Clara was the first to wake early now, stepping out before sunrise to feed the hens, braid her hair tight, and help James with his boots. He followed her everywhere, shadow, quiet eyes brighter each week. He still startled at sharp sounds, still froze when a door closed too fast. But he laughed, now sharp, sudden boyish. The kind of laugh Jacob hadn't heard in a long time. One morning Jacob found them both out in the barn, Clara brushing the mare in long, steady strokes while James clutched a fistful of oats, holding them out with a mix of fear and joy. The horse bent her nose to his palm like she knew to be gentle. Clara looked up when Jacob stepped in. "She lets him do it now," she said. "Didn't before." Jacob leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "Takes time to trust." Clara didn't answer, but her eyes met his, and there was something steady in them now. Something that had stopped running. That afternoon, they planted the early crop potatoes and onion sets, fingers in black soil still cool from winter. Jacob showed them how to watch the shadows, how to mark rows with string, how to lay the seed in deep enough not to drown. "You talk more when you're in the dirt," Clara said. Jacob looked up, startled. "Do I?" She shrugged. "Like the ground makes it easier." He thought about that as he pressed a seed into the furrow. Maybe she was right. At supper, James fell asleep at the table, face nestled in the crook of his arm. Clara carried him to the cot without being asked. When she came back, Jacob was clearing plates, hands moving slow. She stood beside him, watching. "Was my mama scared?" she asked. He didn't lie. She was. But she came anyway. She never stopped looking. Clara nodded. "I think I understand now." Later that night, when the fire burned low, Jacob took down the old box from the mantel. Inside were Annie's things, faded letters, a brass hairpin, a piece of lace she'd worn to church once. He laid them out on the table and let Clara see. She touched each one like it was holy. "Do you think she knows?" she asked. "I think she always knew you'd come home." They sat there a long time, the kind of quiet that holds more than words ever could. Outside, the wind had gone soft. No longer sharp with cold, just restless. Curious. Jacob looked at the two cots, one small, one smaller, and then at the window where dawn was starting to smear the dark. He thought of what came next. Not just surviving, living, growing things again, fixing the back fence, teaching James to ride, letting Clara decide what her own name meant. He stood, walked to the door, and stepped outside. The air smelled of thawing earth and something like hope. From behind him, Clara's voice, small but sure. "Jacob." He turned. She held up the horseshoe from the wall, the one that had once belonged to Annie. "Can we hang this on the gate?" He swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. Yeah, we can do that." They walked out together, hung it under the wide sky where the wind could touch it and the land could remember. Clara reached for his hand. He let her take it. The gate stood open, and this time no one was leaving. The West never tells its whole story at once. Subscribe and stay a while.